I don't look this way.
Time to start moving.
Welcome to the September 23rd, 2019 Village of Lake Bluff Board of Trustees meeting. Could we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Enkelman.
Here.
Trustee Grenier.
Here.
Trustee Markey.
Here.
Trustee Meyer.
Here.
Trustee Toll.
Here.
Everybody please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. To start us out this evening, we have a proclamation designating October 2019 Fire Prevention Month. Whereas in 2018, the U.S. fire departments responded to 1,319,500 fires, or one fire every 24 seconds. And whereas nationwide, there were 3,400 fire deaths, or one every 137 minutes. And whereas property loss resulting from fire during the same period totaled in excess of $13.3 billion. And whereas an enlightened and supportive citizenry can be effective in reducing both loss of life and property damage resulting from fire. And whereas the Village of Lake Bluff is committed to protecting its citizens from fire losses. And whereas the Village of Lake Bluff is served by an all-volunteer fire department which works with its residents to promote fire safety. Now therefore be it proclaimed by the Village President and Board of Trustees of the Village of Lake Bluff, County of Lake, and State of Illinois, hereby proclaim October 2019 Fire Prevention Month in the Village of Lake Bluff. Village of Lake Bluff residents are encouraged to change the batteries in their home smoke detectors, form a fire escape plan for their home, and participate in continuing information and educational activities of the Lake Bluff Fire Department during Fire Prevention Month and throughout the year, and to practice fire safety and prevention on a continuing basis. Okay. Do I have a motion to approve, accept this proclamation?
So moved.
Thank you for Ms. Anchorman. Do I have a second?
Second.
And second by, sorry, Mr. Grenier. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We have consideration of the minutes of the September 9th, 2019 Village Board meeting. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
So moved. That was Mr.
Toll. Seconded by
Toll, by
Markey.
Ms. Markey. Thank you. Signed simultaneous. Any corrections, additions? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
At this point, the village board sets the order of the meeting, and with your permission, board, I would like to move up number 16 and number 8B, which is under the village administrator's report. Okay,
So moved.
so moved on that one, second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. An ordinance granting a special use permit to Two Paws Up Dog Training Incorporated to operate a dog training business in the Village L1 Light Industry Zoning District. This is first reading approval, which is a voice vote. There also is a request to waive second reading and approve the ordinance, which would then be required a roll call vote. On August 23rd, 2019, the Village of Lake Bluff received a zoning relief application from Two Paws Up Dog Training Incorporated applicant to allow a dog training business to operate in the L1 Light Industry District. The applicant's business would be a sublease from Forest Bluff Animal Hospital and is located in part of the space authorized for use as a veterinary hospital, dog daycare, kennel, boarding, grooming, and training business under Forest Bluff's special use permit. However, Forest Bluff's special use permit is not transferable and cannot be used by Two Paws Up to authorize this use. A new special use permit is required to authorize their business to open. At its September 18, 2019 meeting, the PCZBA conducted a public hearing and unanimously recommended that the village board grant the requested special use permit. The PCBA's recommendation includes 2 special conditions consistent with those imposed upon Forest Bluff Animal Hospital. The applicant shall allow Forest Bluff's Animal Hospital employees to use the entrance on the north side of the building to access the employee parking lot, and the applicant may not install outdoor kennels, runs, or other facilities. In the attached letter, the applicant requests that the village board waive second reading and approve the ordinance in order to allow them to expediently occupy the tenant space and open their business. Did I already get a motion on that?
No.
No, I did not. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, so moved by Mr. Meyer and a second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Ankerman. Thank you. Questions? Comments?
I had a question about parking. I feel like when we allowed the special use permit for the veterinary office, that we talked a little bit about parking in that area and that the parking was kind of tight. And so I'm just wondering how this might impact the parking going forward.
Glenn Cole, the village's staff liaison to the Plan Commission Zoning Board of Appeals, is going to answer that.
Certainly. So when the special use permit for this site was granted, our parking calculations there were assumed that this space will be occupied by Forest Bluff. So in a certain manner of thinking, there's no additional parking created by this sublease. We're already accounted for that demand. Anecdotally, I've been out there a few times at the site during the pendency of this application. There's always been available parking in the front and in the rear. Not to say I'm always there representative times. I'm here during business hours, right? But
So you
hasn't
don't
come to
think
my
there'll be an
attention.
issue? You don't think there'll be any issues? Okay.
And I would add to that over time, the village has tried to rely on the business operator on parking need. Like when the village went through the analysis for the Target development and redevelopment of that property, the village's standards for that building was much more aggressive in terms of parking demand than what Target felt like they could live with, and having operated Targets all over the world, essentially. And so we tend to rely on, to some degree, the applicants and the operators to seem like they're comfortable with the parking, because they're also, taking risk in operating a business at a particular site. And if they don't have adequate parking, that's not going to benefit them.
Okay, thanks.
I just have a quick question. Is it correct to say that there is a version of a similar business already operating, and this is just carving it out with somebody else now taking responsibility? So it's really not a big increase in what's already happening there? It's just a different ownership, a different entity? Is that right?
essentially.
So it's really not as new as it might appear? It's a different name?
Yeah, so they never occupied this space, but yes, different name, different operator,
Okay.
same similar activity.
But they're not coming in, like, the people coming in for the veterinary business are coming in for veterinary services versus this is gonna be dog training. So they're two separate activities, correct?
Yes and no. So the special use permit for Forest Bluff Animal Hospital also authorized dog training, kettling,
Okay.
boarding, and so on. I think it was anticipated that this might be a bigger part of their business than it ultimately was, but that's speculation.
Any other questions?
I just had a question about the request for the waiver of second reading. I'm not a fan of waiving the second reading just because it doesn't give everybody who might read about it, hear about it on the much-watched television program, to give an opportunity to say, hey, I didn't know this was happening, or I'm concerned about that. And the interest in doing that was to take advantage of being able to prepare for the upcoming holidays, like in November and Christmas and December, those holidays when people would be leaving town and need the services. And had you heard anything, Drew, in terms of concern from the public, or is there any reason to believe that there might be some pushback? Because I just feel a little bit reluctant to waive second reading every time it's asked for without understanding what it might mean.
Mrs. Belmonte, I see you're in the audience. Would you like to come up and explain why you would like the second reading to be waived?
I don't think I need to introduce myself, but I'm Brenda Belmonte, so thank you for considering the waiver of the second reading. One of the reasons that we really wanted to try to get this going is there's some logistics that we want to work with Yuppie Puppy. They're very much in favor of us going into that space, and they anticipate a full boarding season. So they would also like to be able to offer a training option. So the more time that we have to be able to prepare the space and the marketing and get that rolling, the better obviously it is for us financially. And since there is a special use permit already for that space, my thought is if you were going to have anybody object to it, it would have been done when Forest Bluff was going in, because we're not asking for anything that isn't already in place there. And our impact is much lower than, say, a Yuppie Puppy who is right next door. And this isn't going to be a full-scale boarding or a training operation. What we're really looking to do is add an additional service. So we will not be hosting events like we are at our current facility. We won't be hosting large-scale classes. It's simply going to be a smaller version and really mirroring Forest Bluff's hours with all of our employees and our clients utilizing that back entrance during the day.
Got it. And again, you've not heard anything from the public, from anyone else who may?
I have not. And Glenn, was there anybody testifying at the public hearing at all? Zero.
Okay. Well, good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your consideration.
You? Any other questions? Any other comments? All right, on this is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Motion to waive second reading.
okay.
Second.
Okay, I have a first and a second on that one. Ooh, any questions, comments on that one? All right, let's have a roll call, please.
Trustee Enkelman.
Aye.
Trustee Grenier.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
All right, I'm also, for your approval, have moved up under the Village Administrator's Report 8B, which is a recommendation of the PCZBA regarding regulation of recreational cannabis business. At its July meeting and at the direction of the Village Board, the PCZBA opened a public hearing regarding the proposed prohibition of recreational cannabis business within the village. At that time, the PCZBA's consensus was to continue the public hearing to its August meeting to allow the public additional time to participate. As the PCZBA did not meet in August, the hearing was continued to the PCZBA's September meeting with multiple forms of notice provided to the public. At this meeting, the PCZBA reviewed research and white papers regarding the local impacts of commercial cannabis and possible effects of dispensaries upon crime, youth, and young adult use, characteristics of use, property values, health outcomes, and municipal revenues. The PCZBA also accepted testimony from the Chief of Police and members of the public, both personally and in writing. At the conclusion of the hearing, by a 5-1 vote, the PCZBA recommended the Village Board authorize recreational cannabis businesses as a special use in the L1 Light Industry District. Were the board to be amenable to this course of action, the PCZBA would ask that this issue be remanded to allow a text amendment with specific regulations to be drafted. The PCZBA is prepared to call a special meeting at 6 p.m. on October 3rd, if desired, to continue these deliberations. The majority voting in favor expressed as the basis of their recommendation its findings that the revenues generated by a retail cannabis dispensary would provide financial support to the village. Allowing a recreational retail dispensary via special use permit would provide the village the ability to exert control. The presence of retail dispensaries in the village may suppress illegal black market marijuana dealers. Retail dispensaries would serve Lake Bluff residents as a retail amenity similar to liquor establishments. Chair Peters, the dissenting vote, expressed his opinion that authorizing recreational marijuana businesses would be incompatible with the village's beliefs, values, and brand. Evidence considered by the PCZBA at its September 13th meeting is attached, as well as the most recent version of an ordinance drafted to prohibit all recreational cannabis business. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Ms. Ankerman, and a second?
What is the motion?
Well, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Motion to consider.
I think clear,
Oh, it isn't. You know what? We're just discussing this tonight. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm ahead of myself.
thus ends my report. Right?
I'm ahead of myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, this is strictly a discussion, I was getting too serious.
Yeah, so
Okay.
essentially, the PCZBA is really looking direction from the village board on this, and so is staff, frankly, right? You have some choices here. You can accept the recommendation and move down that path and give them direction to go back and talk about it some more. If that's something you want to do, there's another agenda item in front of you to establish a tax at the highest rate under the act to collect the revenue that was talked about at the PCZBA. Alternatively, the village board can talk about spending more time discussing the issue. Nothing has to happen with specificity as far as taking formal action and establishing the village's position on whether or not to allow or prohibit retail recreational marijuana sales. That doesn't happen tonight, doesn't have to happen tonight. But if you have the inkling that you want to entertain that, I would recommend you pass the tax tonight as presented. So I guess to clearly state the alternatives in front of you is you can have a conversation about the recommendation. That's probably the best place to start and see where that leads, with the idea that you don't have to take a formal stance tonight on where you want to go. But you may, and you can choose to prohibit0tonight, and that if that's your plan, then we would need to take direction to go back and place on the agenda at an upcoming meeting the ordinance that would prohibit recreational marijuana sales.
Okay. At this point, I see some folks in the audience, and if anyone would like to come up to comment, please do. Okay. Please state your names.
Good evening, President O'Hara and the Village Trustees, and thank you for your service to our community. My name is Andy Duran. I live at 454 Rockland Avenue in the East Terraces. I'm coming to you today as the Executive Director of Lake Forest-based nonprofit LEAD, Linking Efforts Against Drugs. I'm also a colleague of yours as I regularly sit in your very seats as a newly elected member of the Lake Bluff School District 65 Board of Education. More importantly, I'm the father of 2 children at LBES, a 4th grader and a 2nd grader. Frankly, I'm shocked, surprised, and a bit disappointed that our PCZBA recommended that you allow recreational marijuana dispensaries in the village of Lake Bluff. That recommendation seems contrary to the spirit of Lake Bluff in basically every way imaginable. A few weeks ago, I sent each of you and each of the PCZBA members a robust packet of information concerning why a commercialized industry for marijuana is not a fit for Lake Bluff. I'd be happy to resend that after this meeting if that would be helpful. My ask of you is quite simple: to place the health and well-being of our community over the profits of the marijuana industry. I'm proud to live in a town that's cultivated a very safe and family-friendly reputation, as well as home to one of the state's best school districts. Being a hub for marijuana would weaken this brand, which is far more valuable than any small amount of tax revenue that may or may not be collected. A recent study published in the journal Society for the Study of Addiction showed that teens and young adults who live within close proximity to a marijuana dispensary are positively associated with more frequent use of marijuana in the past month than those who do not live in that same proximity. The correlation is that the closer a young person lives to a marijuana dispensary, the more likely they are to be regular marijuana users. In states that have already legalized or commercialized marijuana, roughly 75% of municipalities, including the states of California, Colorado, and Michigan, have opted out of marijuana retail sales on a local level. Many of our neighboring communities in Illinois have already taken this action to do the same. The money argument really isn't even relevant as far as I'm concerned. The tax revenue projections are being grossly over-exaggerated by the industry in an attempt to get communities like us to literally buy in. But even if this did prove to be a windfall, our community values, I don't believe, are for sale. Even CVS turned down $2 billion in sales when they stopped selling cigarettes. I know Lake Bluff well enough to know that it does not want to accept revenue from an industry that profits from addiction. Here's what I know. Number 1, marijuana is a harmful, addictive substance, period. Number 2, more than 90% of addiction begins in adolescence. The big marijuana industry knows that their best chance at getting long-term customers is to start with teens and young adults. Please don't underestimate the link between the vaping epidemic that we now find ourselves in and the rise of legalized marijuana. Number 3, over many years, Lake Bluff has cultivated and consequently highly values our status as a safe, family-friendly town. This is the brand that we've all worked hard to build and that you are entrusted to protect. This is why most people choose to move and raise their families here. Number 4, there's no reason to rush into allowing this in Lake Bluff. The most prudent approach seems to me to be to opt out and find out and to learn from the mistakes of other communities rather than to allow our residents and our youth to be a test tube for this drug policy. Number 5, if a commercialized industry for marijuana is allowed in Lake Bluff And if we truly believe in that data that tells us that young people are more prone to use the closer they live to a dispensary, then if we don't opt out, here's what we can expect: a significant increase in teen usage. That means more counselors, more social workers, and more law enforcement will be needed as a result. The marginal revenue expected from taxes will not cover these costs. Taxpayers will instead be footing that bill. Number 6, and finally probably my most important point, I've spent my whole career working with youth. Our youth look to their community leaders, you and me, to set the example, and they're always watching to see what we do and how we act. Taking the action of opting out not only safeguards our community from an increase in drugs and frankly drug traffic, but even more importantly, it sends a message to our youth that we value their well-being above all else, and that we do not endorse getting high as a way to recreate. The industry in this regard has everything to gain and really nothing to lose. Us in our community has very little to gain and really everything to lose. There are complicated decisions you make as trustees, believe me, I understand that, but I think this one's a no-brainer. We don't want to sell marijuana in Lake Bluff under any circumstance, and I trust that you, my fellow community leaders, will ensure that doesn't happen. I ask you to please help me protect Lake Bluff and the North Shore from consequences that will detract from this being the amazing place to live that it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Sir, please come up.
Good evening. My name is Jim Arnold, and I live here in Lake Bluff. I've lived here for 8 years. Before that, I spent 25 years in Highland Park. I've got 2 children. One's 32, the other's 28. The daughter works for Sir Richard Branson in London. My son, who's the oldest, has been growing cannabis in the Emerald Triangle of Northern California for the last 5 years. That kind of blew my mind when it happened. But since I hadn't smoked weed in 45 years, I thought I better look into this a little bit. So I did. And what you just heard from this gentleman is, I'm going to use an English term, balderdash. It's not true. For a number of reasons, which I'm going to speak to right now. The problem looking at marijuana, especially in our age group, is that most of us saw reefer madness when we were kids. We've been taught our whole lives, just say no. Do any of you remember when you were teenagers? Did you just say no to anything that was fun and your friends were doing? Like drinking? No, I'm sure you didn't. Or if you did, I'm proud of you. The truth be told here, that stopping our children from getting a hold of marijuana, that ship sailed 30 years ago. There's nobody in Lake Forest High School or Highland Park High School or Deerfield or anybody else who can't get cannabis within an hour of wanting it. That's just how it is. That's the black market. That's what legalization and control tamps down. It doesn't eliminate it, it tamps it down. The other thing it does, because of the rigorous testing of all the product, it removes dangerous additives, pesticides, herbicides. The bottom line is, if somebody wants to smoke cannabis or eat it in gummies or whatever, they're going to do it. Us setting example, I don't know if you remember your teenage years. Did you look to your parents as examples of what you wanted to do? No. You had a rebellious streak. Most kids do. So, the effect of legalization, and I don't want it downtown, are you kidding me? But out in the L1 district makes sense. He mentioned vaping. Well, I'm going to show you something right here. This is my personal vaping device. I've been using it for 5 years. I've had one cold in 5 years. The kids that you're seeing on television with these handful of deaths and all these sick kids, where that comes from is they're smoking black market cartridges that have additives in them like vitamin E acetate because they're so lucrative. Once we have legalization, access to that will drop severely. And, well, let me address something else that I've heard. Marijuana is a gateway drug. Baloney. Alcohol is a gateway drug. Now, about 10 years ago, I had a 50,000 square foot paintball place in North Chicago. Had a lot of police come and play on a regular basis. And just out of curiosity, I go, you know, I'd ask individually, not as a group. I'd say, what would you rather see in another human being? Somebody who's been drinking heavily or smoking weed? They go, oh, nothing to talk about, smoking weed. I go, really? Why? He says, well, people who smoke weed to relax, take care of pain, all kinds of stuff like that. They don't go home and beat their wife. They don't beat their kids. They don't do any of that kind of stuff. They don't get in a fight in a bar. Now, should you drive underneath? Hell no. You shouldn't drink and drive or smoke and drive. But let's be clear here. Let's go with facts, not made-up biases that have existed since even way before the time of Nancy Reagan. Just say no. So let's do something smart here, because this is going to be legal in 2 to 3 years. And we're going to look stupid if we go, oh no, we're above it. No, we're not. I suspect quite a few people in this room, maybe even on the board, smoke on a regular basis to relax. Go home, watch the Bears game, take a couple puffs, you're done. It's much easier on the body also. So anyway, do you have any questions about what I've said so far? Oh, by the way, I get at least 2 to 3 medical papers from all over the world on my computer every day. The problem is that we're 50 years behind the gun on this. The war on drugs started in 1970. So research is racing to keep up, trying to make up the lost ground. And it's working. Any questions? That's all I got to say. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Is anyone else? Wait.
Good evening, everybody. Kate Briand, pardon me, 610 Lincoln Avenue. So I also addressed the PCZBA at their recent meeting, and I'll just reiterate briefly, because actually what was read is a lot of what I had to say in terms of control. That's why Des Plaines has moved ahead in other communities, pardon me, sorry about that, because of the issue of control. There was an article in the Lake Forester last Thursday, and it cited the reasons that Highwood is going to move ahead. And the mayor said, officials want to give adults the opportunity to buy products of their choice in a safe environment close to home. And that really is what we're talking about. I don't think anybody in this room is advocating that we stand for something that would be harmful to kids. I know I'm not. My niece and nephew are 14 years old, and I have this conversation with them often. However, what we're talking about has to do with consenting adults in the same way that we control other vice products such as alcohol and tobacco. They are not in conflict with one another. We, as a community, have embraced alcohol and the sale of it and the tax revenue from it as a way to revitalize our central business district, and there's no denying that. It's just a fact. We have
events that are more or less oriented around that, whether they be block parties, et cetera, they're fun. The alcohol is for adults. No one is advocating that this take place in the central business district. That's not appropriate. In Breckenridge, Colorado, the dispensaries are on Airport Road. They're not downtown. I can say from frequent travel to Breckenridge, Colorado, that it's a great town, a family-friendly town. People from all over the world travel to Breckenridge, Colorado with their kids. They don't hesitate to do so. And when we talk about values, we're splitting hairs because what are we talking about in terms of medical marijuana? Are we casting aspersions on people that use that? If we have people that live here in Lake Bluff and use medical marijuana, do they not live up to the values of Lake Bluff? And that's trying to have it both ways as far as I see it. And as far as our brand is concerned, with due respect, I'm not sure that many people are focusing on something like this. A brand is a nebulous concept. It's not a concrete thing. So I know from your previous meeting in June that you sent a message that said that you were not in favor of doing this for a variety of different reasons, whether they be preemption or other reasons where you just couldn't see your way clear to doing this. But by saying no, you abdicate all control over this situation, and it goes to neighboring communities. And as far as the revenue goes, I'll say what I said to the PCZBA. There isn't a single soul sitting here who can tell me that we don't need the money. We do. And $95,000 is the conservative estimate according to the excellent packet that Glenn and staff put together. The packet is outstanding. I hope you guys all looked through it, had a chance to even peruse it, because it's incredibly helpful when making this decision. There's a ton of really good information in there. And you can look to cities like Fort Collins, Colorado, who had the exact same conversation. That's a university town. And they went ahead and did this. And they certainly have a brand that they need to think about when parents send their kids there for college, don't they? And they went ahead and did it because they wanted to do it in a controlled fashion and have control over it. And we are talking about selling a legal product to adults. And my fear is that, as one of the commissioners on the PCZBA said, is we're making a fear-based decision instead of a fact-based decision. And we're using old news, reefer madness from the 1930s, to inform our current decision-making. And if the 2018 Farm Bill is any indication, with the declassification of hemp as a narcotic, then we can look forward to the federal government doing the same thing soon. And do you want to set this village up for the future, even 20 years from now, to be able to say yes, when attitudes change in the same way that this town went from being dry to not? Things change. And I believe that we can have it both ways. We can educate our kids to make responsible choices as young people, as we've done with MAD and SAD, and now make it totally unacceptable to drink and drive. And kids are using designated drivers and making wise choices. We can do that. But do we have to preclude adults from getting access to a product you may or may not like in the process and punish them? That seems to assume that your job is to protect us from ourselves. And is that really what, in my view, a relatively libertarian body in past meetings you've shown to be that way? Is that really what you want to stand for? So I think we can do this through a special use. I think Commissioner Murray was right. That will allow you to restrict it tremendously and let adults make the choices that adulthood has given them the right to make. Thanks for your time and consideration.
Would anyone else like to speak?
Hi, everybody. I'm Catherine Driscoll. Just one quick comment that I wanted to add to some of the other comments that have already been made. You know, about 8 or 10 years ago, this village board made some really great critical decisions that have resulted in a packed uptown Lake Bluff pretty much every single night of the week. When you come to town, you can't find a parking space. It's a vibrant community. There are 1 million people running around. You all saw what was coming in the housing meltdown and some other issues that have really stressed economically a lot of other towns. And you made some critical decisions that allowed us to have outdoor seating and allowed us to have these great block parties and allowed us to have a lot of events where adults could drink in Lake Bluff. And so I hope that you all will, in this decision, also be looking forward at what's coming, because it is going to be legal in Illinois. It is likely to be legal federally within the next, I don't know how long, decade or so. And it is, you know, I would hate to see Lake Bluff turn down or prohibit the opportunity to have dispensaries and end up with them just across the border, like a Costco situation, where we don't get the benefit of the tax revenue and somebody drives another half mile to go to a dispensary. So, thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? Before I turn it over to discussion, I'd like to hear from our chief of police.
Good evening. I'm Michael Hosking. I'm the chief of police. I appeared before the PZBA and I was asked if I had any prepared notes or a speech, and I said no, I didn't, but I was prepared to answer questions. I think one of the first things I said, though, was as chief of police for the Village of Lake Bluff, excuse me, I would be opposed to any dispensary from a law enforcement perspective. I can't speak to the medical benefits or hazards of it, but from a law enforcement perspective, I'm just diametrically opposed to it. There still is the federal law that prohibits it. I know it's in conflict with the Illinois state law. I think Illinois rushed into this without researching it enough, but that's what legislators do. That's their prerogative. Today, I called the Village of Mundelein just to see if I could get some information about their dispensary. Since January 1, they've had to respond to 60 burglar alarms or panic alarms at the business. They responded to 10 reports of suspicious people possibly selling drugs. Only one of them was bona fide. They had 4 car accidents in their little parking lot, and one subject was there threatening suicide. And although in and by itself, it doesn't sound like a lot of activity, I think it's going to be an additional caseload that's going to be put upon the police department to respond to. You know, I likened that at the PCBA that there's going to be a product here if it's approved in Lake Bluff. Everybody's going to know where it's at, and there's going to be a lot of people sitting at home or sitting at work all trying to figure out one thing: how do I get in there and get it? It's a cash basis, so there's going to be opportunities for whether it's like a bank. I mean, even though we have banks and they have safes and alarm systems, people still go after the banks. And I think in this particular case, the dispensaries will become the next favorable target. I guess I would prefer if somebody has a question for me.
Thank you, Chief. Does any of the board members have a question of the chief?
I have a question. Have you
Yes, sir.
been able to speak with any other police chiefs in town other than Mundelein? I'm just looking at, and have you heard any give you an argument for doing this from a police perspective?
I attended the North Shore Chiefs meeting the day before yesterday. It was attended by 24 chiefs along the North Shore, going down to Evanston, north to us, and out west. There was 24 chiefs there. And not one person in that room, quite frankly, although they all there's a couple of them there that know they're going to be getting dispensaries, there wasn't one chief in the room that wants it. Because they're all concerned, or they have the same concerns that I have about what element is it going to bring to that particular facility and to the people that go there.
You know, is the concern that if there are so few, the people who are going to agree to do this, there are so few dispensaries around that they're going to be attracting people from afar, I guess? Is that part of what their concern is?
Yes.
Right, okay.
And if it is going to be allowed under federal law, why not wait? What's the rush? Because to me, as a police chief, it's either against the law or it's not against the law, and as long as there's a law saying it's against the law is the law. It's illegal.
Do we have any, it wouldn't be local data, but do we have any data about auto accidents, or is there a way that you could measure that if someone was driving erratically and you pulled them over? Is there anything in place for that?
There are more tests for if you're driving under the influence of alcohol than there is for cannabis or other drugs. More and more emphasis is going to be placed on the observations of the person during field performance tests when you're testing or looking for marijuana intoxication than on alcohol. Because with alcohol, you can have them either blowing a PBT or take them back to the station once they're arrested and blowing a breathalyzer. And that's it. But there is no definitive test for cannabis or other intoxicating compounds. So it's going to be on the officer to detail exactly what he saw, how he saw it, what the videos from the cars show.
And how would that, like, if the officer pulled someone over and suspected that they were under the influence of cannabis, but they have no way of actually proving that, then what happens to that driver? Can they leave?
If in the officer's opinion they're under the influence, they're not going to leave, they're going to get arrested. You know, they might be able to smell it in the car or on an odor about their person or whatever. They're going to ask them to perform some field sobriety tests. And if they can't pass it, more than likely, they'll get arrested. We arrested about 6 or 7 people the last 2 years for driving under the influence of either cannabis or some other drug.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question for the chief? Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Open it up for discussion.
Well, I'd be happy to start. As I mentioned the last time we discussed this, and as the chief just alluded to, the contemplated marijuana activities remain illegal under federal law. That's the Controlled Substance Act, 21 U.S.C. Section 811. Accordingly, my position and my vote is that we should enact the most restrictive ordinance to control and contain this activity, which remains illegal.
I look to the vision that we cast for our village. And the Lake Bluff guiding principles are that we each take personal responsibility for the quality of our community. I take that very seriously. I'm not concerned with looking stupid, missing a financial opportunity, or casting dispersions. None of those things are on my agenda. My agenda is to take personal responsibility for the quality of our community. And over many years, we've invested in LEAD as an organization to speak wisdom and truth into our youth. Their information is based on actual experience. It's based on the test of time, and it's based and rooted in the love for the next generation. And we've now said for years, come in and lead us, lead our adults, lead our kids. Not everyone follows the lead, but there's a reason that we've invested in this organization, because of their wisdom and their vision. And why we would then turn around and say, we're not going to follow what lead says is just not wise at all. So I looked at their presentation, their numbers, their reasons, and every single one of them I said, yes, 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 and yes. I can do nothing else other than support what we have said all along is wisdom and love for our community.
I'd like to echo what Barbara said, but I'd also like to add that I think our kids do look up to us. They may act rebellious because they're teenagers, or tweens even, but they're watching us all the time. And I hope that our behaviors they do see our behaviors and that impacts them. I'd also like to say that this law seems to be changing constantly. So what was passed in January continues to evolve. It continues to change. I think Drew even said that the law right now, they're tweaking it even more, and that came out this week that they were going to make some changes to it. So we're essentially dealing with a law that we're really not sure where it's going or what the final form will be. And I'd love to take a wait and see approach on this, only because I think that gives us a little time to understand the law a little bit better, but I think it also gives us the opportunity that if 2 years or 18 months down the road somebody comes to us and says, hey, this is something we're thinking about, that doesn't mean that we can't alter our code. It just means that in this situation, we're being prudent and we're really trying to look out for the whole of our community.
I have a couple of questions to ask, and maybe Drew, I'll throw them at you, but anybody that can answer this, and maybe you can also. And that is, maybe could you articulate right now, what is the difference between the new marijuana law in the state as it practically affects us and the current alcohol laws? In other words, what is it that's different about what we're trying to decide? Because I think one of the stronger arguments for why this law was passed was that we should be treating it the same as alcohol. And we have this infrastructure built around that, about regulating it, also making it as difficult as possible to do things that we don't want to have done with alcohol, but that ultimately, that the two should be the same. And I'm perceiving right now that the law in Illinois is not the same.
You all want to answer, and I will let you more experts answer, but I'll answer as the liquor commissioner.
Right.
As the liquor commissioner, anyone that wants to have a liquor license in this town puts an application in, follows to the village. I look at it and then I recommend it to the village board if you decide that that's appropriate. Each one is done individually, but it is approved by the village, by the municipality. And we have direct control. If they violate it, we have certain specific remedies or actions that we can take up to yanking the license. The license for recreational marijuana, though we can regulate and put it in our zoning, is given by the state, not by the local municipalities. We have absolutely no control who gets that license. And as I understand it, after almost 2 years of studying this, going to numerous meetings with mayors and police chiefs and legislatures and everything else. I've been down to Springfield twice this year. that we have limited, once it is be enacted, we have limited controls on it. It's state prescribed. So to me, that's where it is. The village has very limited control over that, whereas with a liquor, when we compare it to liquor, we have tremendous amount of control over those licenses and how it's enacted and how they're done.
So from a practical standpoint, if we say, all right, we're going to allow this in Lake Bluff, but we're going to do special use permit, how does that work then? Let's say we get, the state gets, do we get, or does the state get 3 applications, for example, for someone to set up a dispensary in Lake Bluff? Is that what happens then?
You know, the way this law is, in fact, the lawyers will probably do, and maybe Drew can do better at that, explaining that. This law is in such a state of flux. It has changed so much,
Right.
even over since they initiated it. I can't even tell you that. I think, can you?
If I understand just repeat
Go
the
ahead.
question, because I think there is a clear answer.
Yeah, the question is, so the process, if we say we want to allow marijuana sales and we're gonna do it through special use permit.
Right.
Let's say more than one person applies to be able to do that in Lake Bluff. To whom do they apply and how does that
They
process
apply to
work?
the state,
State,
for
it's
their
the state.
state license. Now,
Okay.
the state license for a new dispensary, part of the requirement that they would have to show the state is that they have local approval or authority to establish it in the state, in the municipality where they're locating.
And that they would have that by having it, they meet the zoning regs. Right?
Correct.
The village would have to award them the special use
Correct.
permit.
Right.
We would have to award them a special use
Yeah, if
permit
they meet the
because,
zoning,
okay,
yeah.
that was kind of the crux of where I was
Correct.
trying to get at is, what sort of control do we have over that? And so what you're saying is that if we allow this, then we have to have some rationale for denying it.
If they meet the requirements, my understanding, listening to everybody say, we can't deny it.
They're meeting the state, if they're
They
meeting the
meet,
state
if they meet
regulation.
the zoning that we have set up, whatever that
Right.
may be.
So in this case, the L1 district.
Right.
Well, and whatever other special
Standards.
use permitting requirements
But we
we
can't,
want.
if they meet that, then we can't say, no, we don't like your reputation, or we don't like this, and we can't say no, we can't say no.
No, although those types of things could be part of the conditions on a special use in the zoning code.
Okay, so is it accurate? I'm just trying, not accurate. So I was trying to get a little bit more detail on what Kathy is getting at here, is by loss of control versus, how would you characterize that?
Well, I mean, the village president described it correctly. The licensing of these facilities, the licensing is the regulations that are going to be imposed on these facilities is going to be extreme.
Right.
And they're going to have to satisfy those to get a state license. There was a legislative determination that this was not to be licensed similar to liquor establishments, where there is a local license as well as a state license. There was a determination that that was not going to be the case with these
So they basically
establishments.
took that power away from us.
And I will tell you that most of the mayors in the state requested that if they would, it would be much more agreeable and amenable if they had followed the liquor licenses
Right.
that everybody has, because that process works. But they chose not to do that.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? How hard is it if we gave out a special use permit and there was a problem, how hard is it to rescind that special use permit?
It's not, so long as our ordinance, which it would be, is clear as to what conditions they need to meet. If they fail the condition, the board can, by ordinance adopted, revoke the special use permit.
And would that then revoke their license?
If
as
they
well?
don't have local zoning control, or zoning authority, yes. We haven't gone through that. Nobody's gone through that yet in the state, but that would be our opinion.
Is that generally not a difficult process then? I guess
No, I
that's
mean,
what
the
I'm
way
trying
our
to
special-
understand, like in the past, have we ever rescinded a special use permit? Is that difficult to do?
Billboards is what I'm thinking in my head, right?
Because there are legal
Yeah.
ramifications or anything?
No, I mean, because our special use permit ordinances are drafted so that there's a paragraph in there, I think we've talked about this in a recent example, I can't remember what it was, that if one of the conditions is not met, then the village board has the authority, and not cured within 30 days or some period like that, then the village board has the authority to revoke it by ordinance. And the applicant signs an unconditional agreement and consent to agree to the terms of that ordinance and not contest the procedures that that ordinance has. So we've tried to build in so that the village board doesn't get caught with an argument about, hey, I've got a right to the special use, you know. I don't think we've ever, I'm trying to remember whether we've ever actually had to revoke one. Yeah, but I don't think we revoked it. But we have in other places, and that's why we write them that way, because if you are granting a special permit, it means you're giving some special zoning relief, and it requires strict compliance with those conditions, and if they're not followed, you should have the right to revoke it.
What if the consequences are something that are difficult to quantify? So, you know, there's an increased level of crime. Do we have to say it was X and now it's Y? And that's, I mean, some of these things would be difficult to prove. And so then here's somebody who's invested in this business, and let's say they go down the road a year or two and they've invested in employees and equipment and security and all this stuff, and then we kind of go, you know what, this, I don't know what we thought it was going to be like, but we're not really happy with some of these peripheral things that are happening. And then what do? We say, you're out of business, person who's now invested in all this stuff, and they turn around and, as is the American way, say, well, wait a minute, I'm going to sue you. You are now taking away my livelihood. It just sounds like...
So it's an excellent question. It would turn on how definitive the standards you are able to put in the special use, and to the extent that they are intangible.
Right, it makes it challenging.
That does make it, then it does lead to a dispute.
Like, the youth are fill in the blank. You know, we're upset about that. Can we then yank, you know, I just feel like we're setting ourselves up for, let's see what the problems are, and then see if we can get out of it if it's so bad. And then if we can't, the analogy is you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, because we've already let this morph and grow to what it is.
I would agree. I think, what's the rush, right? I mean, yes, we may lose out if that's a consideration. We may lose out on a little bit of tax revenue. And I understand the draw to whatever tax revenue we can find. But at the same time, where do we stop? Talking about consenting adults. There are other things that are currently illegal done by consenting adults that we certainly would not want here, right? And could potentially be sources of revenue. So I feel like we don't need to be the test case. There's so much unknown about this. The law itself seems to have enough holes in it that I'm not perfectly comfortable with it. And I don't think we are limiting access to our residents who want to partake in cannabis. I mean, we already know that some of our neighboring communities will be hosting dispensaries, even if it's just across the street. So I guess, what's the rush? If we find out that, yeah, it's something that we want, once the law is settled, maybe the federal law is changed, we can relook at it.
I didn't want wait and see to be just a moratorium that says, let's wait 12 months or 24. I just want to put it out there that a wait and see, I would rather prohibit it and let everybody else wait and see the results and deal with the consequences.
Eric, did you want to?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I did want to talk about the regular, I mean, that's the most frustrating thing about this thing to me. Personally, I think it is inevitable. I think we probably all agree with it. It really is an issue of timing. I also feel conscious of the fact that I don't like making decisions on our brand based on personal biases. And it's hard to avoid personal biases with regard to marijuana right now because of, when you're looking backward on it, I think it's very different than where it's going. It's a matter of, are we going to be, there might be a bleeding edge period, then a leading edge period, and then there's going to be a period where it just, it is what it is. I guess my biggest concern is how to enact this regulation based on the thing we talked about before. I do also worry about, and this may affect what the experience that Chief Hoskins and his force are going to have to face, is that we could certainly say no to this, but it literally could be approved on the north side of 176, could it not?
So the county is not finishing they're having their deliberations yet, and chances are it won't be anytime soon. They're leading a task force countywide to examine this issue, and most recent conversations with the Community Development Department director, he has stated that that the county once had believed that they were not allowed to prohibit the reading of the act.
Right.
Was that they've changed their position on that, and they now believe that that is something they can do. That will be on the table as part of their conversations. But that he's not predicting what the county will do with it, but he did say, similar to how the county handled medical marijuana dispensaries, that Lake County staff would be recommending to the county board that they would have buffers in terms of minimum distances from residential zones, residentially zoned properties from dispensaries for recreational purposes as well. And they kind of viewed that as the medical activity and use of property as more innocuous than the retail for recreational. And he says the staff would be recommending something at least as restrictive as medical, but probably more, which would probably, at the end of the day, make areas like Knollwood or immediately neighboring unincorporated Lake County areas impractical to have the retail sales for recreational marijuana.
Okay, so you're finding that unlikely at this point based on what?
Based on what the county
you're
said,
hearing?
but again, I don't want to sit here and make a statement, this is definitive what the county's going to do or not do. But that's the most recent information. Again, this is evolving, and a lot of communities are still struggling with this issue because it's difficult policy, right?
Yeah, and I would certainly feel that our experience with this is going to be impacted by who is not allowing it and who is. I mean, it's going to depend on where it is. I do also feel for people who, the libertarian side of me says people should be allowed to do what they want to do as long as it's legal,
And they will under the act. There'll be lots of
they
things
will.
they can do, right?
And if we restrict it, we're certainly not going to cut off people's ability to do that.
We don't have the authority to do that.
Pardon?
We don't have the authority to do that.
No, we don't have authority, nor and it's just not reality at this point. So I guess, in my view, I'm looking at it purely from an ordinance standpoint and how we enact it. If I step back and look at the community and all the issues, I think it's very difficult for us to have much control over this going forward. And our biases are certainly there, and they're going to influence our decisions a little bit. But I think what's most critical to me honestly is I don't feel that, or I feel confused by the ordinance, and that is bothering me. And it bothers me in the fact that we can't treat it like alcohol, which ultimately I think is probably where we're going to go and should go.
Okay. Anybody else want to say anything? Okay, I'll sum up here. At this point in time, we only have one bite of the apple to prohibit. And yet, down the road or whatever, changes or things, we can always reenact. But this is the only chance we have to prohibit.
And can I clarify that? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the idea that the village board could prohibit today, but 2 weeks from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, could change its position.
I think I just said that, yes.
Okay, I just want to clarify that.
You always do.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did we get feedback from the school districts on this? I mean, I guess I can guess what.
I don't think that was solicited from them.
Okay.
Yeah, come up, it was a question, and you are on the school board, so come on, if you have a question representing the school board, Annie.
So just to be clear, Andy Duran again, I'm answering this question as an individual who serves on the school board, not answering on behalf of the school board.
Right.
I will say in my conversations with our school administrators, many teachers, that we are, most people in this community are staunchly against this. The board has not come out with any sort of communication to you or recommendations to you, nor has Dr. Sophie or any of our principals, but we are in close contact, and I think if you were to ask them the question, they'd have the same answer I would.
Okay. Great, that's something. Okay.
I just wanted to say anecdotally, I did talk to my neighbor across the street and another neighbor, one was an active teacher and one was a, I guess, retired teacher due to being a mother. And both of them, not a surprise. They were not excited about this as something that might come to Lake Bluff. I mean, that's the extent of my informal poll.
The fact that our police department, our police chief, is not in favor of having a facility in our borders, I feel is important. And the fact of potentially increased concerns of how to patrol it is a concern. But I also need to bring up that everyone's talking about the L1 district. Does everybody know that there is an alternate school in the L1 district? There are approximately 15 to 20 teenage students going to an alternate school in our L1 district. That is a concern to me.
Have any of you ever been to a dispensary before? You need to show an ID before you go in. It's like it's different than a liquor store.
If you'd like, ma'am, if you'd like, that's great. If you'd like to speak, please come up here, if you'd like to speak.
That's all I wanted to say.
All right, okay.
You know, so the television.
It's not like you walk in a liquor store and there's a bunch of marijuana out there. You have to show your ID 3 times before you can even buy something. So I've been to dispensaries in Colorado, Oregon, California, Seattle. They're all the same. And I've been in Aspen, Vail, very nice communities. There are no children that are there. The kids don't hang out there. It's most of them are either in like you're talking about a district that's kind of like industrial, or in Aspen, they're right downtown, but you just don't walk in and it's like, you know, you are checked 3 times with an ID. So it's not that the kids are going to be hanging out in front of it.
Thank you. Anybody else from the board here? Okay. I think we have a consensus at this point in time. Would you like, are you going to recommend that the
Maybe a motion to direct staff to-
staff to draft it, to prepare a draft to prohibit at this point in time?
We need a motion on that now?
Yes.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Second.
You have a second, Barbara Ankerman?
I do. Ms. Ankerman, voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Okay. Go back to the regular agenda. That one. Okay. What's that? Oh, I did. Okay. Okay, at this point, we'll go back to the regular agenda, which we allow 15 minutes for anyone in the audience to discuss anything that is not on tonight's agenda. Do we have anybody that wishes to do so? Okay.
I have one more thing, sorry.
What?
The gentleman is here for this one,
Which one? Okay.
if you want to take that without objection.
All right, if there's no objections, we will bring number 13 forward. As I understand, there's someone in the audience, and we don't want them to have to wait too long.
Okay. Read that one, please.
It's an ordinance providing for the issuance of general obligation refunding bonds of the Village of Lake Bluff. Do we have a number?
Of the debt, the actual number?
No, not yet. It's just the draft ordinance. That'll come through after the sale occurs. So it's just the first reading.
All right, first reading, so we don't have a definitive number?
No,
Okay.
next reading will
All
be
right.
definitive.
An ordinance providing for the issuance of general obligation refunding bonds for the Village of Lake Bluff, Lake County, for the purpose of refunding certain outstanding bonds of said village, providing for the levy and collection of a direct annual tax sufficient to pay the principal and of interest of said bonds, authorizing the execution of an escrow letter agreement, and authorizing the sale of said bonds to the purchaser thereof. Given the currently low interest rates, the village has the opportunity to issue bonds to refinance $990,000 of the village's Series 2011 refunding bonds for an anticipated interest savings of approximately $29,000. The sale would be conducted directly with the participating bank, which maximizes the available savings by eliminating the need for a rating, underwriter, and official statement. The bonds would be issued to capture internet's interest savings only and would not extend the life of the 2011 bonds beyond their original maturity date of 12/15/2024. The Finance Committee reviewed the proposed refinancing at their September 9th meeting and unanimously recommended the village proceed with the transaction. This is first reading approval of the ordinance, which would be a voice vote. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Toll. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second by Ms. Markey. Any questions, comments to gentlemen here?
Anthony's here from Spear Financial, the village's financial advisor.
Okay.
Was nice enough to make the trek.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good evening. I could speak to the timing a little bit and then answer any questions. With this being the first reading, the next steps will be issuing a term sheet to local and regional banks to bid on the issue. We will take bids on October 10th and then come back here on the 14th with a firm bid from that winning bidder. So we'll be selecting a bank based on the lowest interest rate, which will produce the most possible savings for this issue. I think the summary talked about the level of savings and the bonds that we'll be refinancing, but if there's any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer.
No.
Anybody? No, thank you thank you, sir.
You're very welcome.
All right.
Voice vote.
I know. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, we will now attempt to go back to the, thank you, get rid of that. A lot of paper there. Okay. We will now go to,
Number 5.
oh,
Number 5.
I know.
Okay, just clarifying.
I, thank you so much. I was wondering what that was.
We bounced around a lot. Yes.
A 5-finger discount?
No.
Okay. All right, non-agenda items, and, okay, we allow 15 minutes, I've already said that.
Okay.
Okay, you forgot that. All right, okay, we are now going back to the finance report,
Warrant report?
which is the warrant report for September 16th through 30th. Expenditures of village funds for payment of invoices in the amount of $441,240.07 for September 16 through 30th. Okay, do we have a motion to pay?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Meyer? Thank you. And second?
Second.
A second by Mr. Grenier. Any comments or questions for the finance director? Roll call, please.
Trustee Grenier.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Ankerman.
Aye.
All right, do I have a motion to accept the 2019 August financial report?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Toll. Do I have a second?
Second?
Second by Ms. Ankerman. All right, turn it over to you.
Sales tax revenue on a cash basis for FY '20 through June is $607,584, which is about $15,000 greater or 2% 2.6% greater than the same reporting period in FY '19. Home rule sales tax revenue on a cash basis for FY '20 through June was $182,995, or 1.1% less than the same reporting period for fiscal year '19, with the annual administrative fees totaling $2,780. Building permit revenue for fiscal year '20 to date, $132,045, or $2,950 less than the last fiscal year for the same period. The May through August fiscal year '20 general fund expenditures of $3,227,614,000 are $250,000 less than the expenditures for the same period in FY '19, and this decrease represents capital improvements at the train station. Current expenditures are consistent with or less than budget.
Okay. All right, any questions? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Can I trouble you for one thing, if I may? There was a question that was raised by trustee Ankerman earlier in the day that goes back to the warrant report with a bill, an invoice and payment to Campanella Construction.
Right.
And she had asked about the project, how was that actually moving along on
Right,
pace or
right.
not? And this is, if you remember, that Campanella was the contractor the village hired to complete the West Sheridan Place and the Lincoln Avenue storm sewer improvements. And I wanted to have Jeff come up and update you all on the progress of that, if that's all right. And also talk a little bit about the village's overall analysis of its stormwater infrastructure that's also ongoing.
Thank you.
All right. It makes me feel dumber than not being able to make this thing come on, but it should. This should get the screen, right, Bettina? Sorry. There we go. All right. Yeah, so this is, this project, we hired Campanella to do it, so thank you for allowing us to hire them. That was, we paid a little bit more, and they've done, I think, a very good job. We've had nothing but compliments from the residents in these streets, other than just, when are you gonna clean everything up? But I've heard very good reports about their personnel being, friendly and kind, helping people get in and out of their driveways. This picture is Park Lane early in the project for the West Sheridan portion of the project. This is West Sheridan today, so they are basically done here. So we increased the storm sewer size, fivefold basically to get water out of this drainage dip and out of these backyards. We had a big storm a week ago, I think, or 2 weeks ago, where the viaduct flooded. This area didn't flood, and that's new. This would have flooded in the past, so our public works guys were happy not to have to go block this off. I'm sure the residents were happy having this draining as well and keeping their street clear. The backyard drained well. That wouldn't have flooded the homes in a storm like that, but that's back there. That gives them some peace of mind. So like I said, we put 18-inch pipe in this area, 21-inch where we saw Park Lane before, and this is working well. If you ever wonder what our streets look like when you dig them up, this is Park Lane. I don't know why I wrote Park Place on there, but
Why does that look unusual, Jeff?
well, this is the whole East Terrace, and basically the North Terrace is a concrete street that was laid pretty much directly on clay. No gravel base, and then we've overtopped them with some asphalt over the years. So this is what we get when we dig. Nice clay. It's not good for drainage. It doesn't let water into it, but it holds the streets up pretty well. So this is basically what the streets in those two subdivisions look like. On the east side, we won't have concrete underneath the asphalt. These two subdivisions do. This is the pit they dug at the end of Lincoln Avenue by West Scranton to bore the new pipe in underneath the state road. We ran a 21-inch pipe from the dip down by the intersection with Hancock up to here. The state said their minimum pipe size to cross their street was 24 inches, so we did that. Again, this worked well in the recent storm. Kate, I think you were watching it too, and it didn't flood the intersection,
No flooding?
which used to flood.
Before they had come further north, so that Jeff and I had a chat.
So the old 80-year-old clay pipe going through some yards and jogging in people's backyards now is not relied upon to drain the street. So there was one question, we had to take down a couple of big cottonwoods at the intersection. We're not going to replant them right now, just they're all packed with roots. Those trees were huge, so we'll probably plant trees in the future. That was a resident asking if we could replant, but we said not yet. So this was the hole as they dug it. It impressed me. I don't know if you were as impressed by digging holes in the streets, but that was a good-sized pit. This is where that pipe ends. So this is standing on the bike path looking south. There's a little ditch here. That ditch runs down closer to the underpass. So that's the new pipe that came out in the riprap to prevent erosion in that area. So those are our two projects that are a pretty big chunk of our capital this year. Another thing that we're spending money on is our storm sewer study, which they presented back in July. The consultant, Christopher Burke, Seabell, they are internally reviewing their draft right now. They're supposed to have it to me next week to take a look at our end. And they're going to come back and see you all, hopefully the second meeting of October, to present their final findings. And depends on how good their draft is, basically. If we have more changes, that might get pushed into November. But I'm looking forward to seeing it. I know the theme is going to be everything's expensive because we've kind of taken the easy projects and done them already. So there's some hard projects that they're going to outline and the improvements they can make. But it's good to have those numbers so we can make decisions on what we want to do in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you for that update.
Thank you. Okay.
Kathy, I just wanted to add something, just for you to know, Jeff and I had a conversation.
Sure, come on up here.
The group, Campanella, was so professional, very attentive to everybody on the block. They were in front of our house for weeks, and we had a small issue. Jeff responded to me right away, but each and every crew member was polite. They cleaned up after themselves, and it was whatever extra we spent as a village was worth it, because I think it's more than just ameliorating the flooding. It's also how do they treat the neighbors, and they were super.
That's good to know.
So just for your future use in making those choices, if we had to go through it again, I would say that they were worth every penny.
Good.
And Jeff's been great, because we had just a minor thing, and he came out right away. And it was the day the viaduct closed, there was a minor issue that it had gone on right there where you saw that big trench. He was on top of it, and I thought, wow, of all the things, the viaduct's flooded, and boom, he was right there. So kudos to him, too, because that's not an easy job.
Thank you.
Anyway, I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That's good. Okay. All righty. You want to go back to you and give an informational report?
Sure. Get back to that.
Any proposed amendments to the village sign code?
Yeah, this stemmed from a conversation at the most recent village board meeting. Trustee Meyer had noted that it seems like we see a lot of certain relief granted by the, going through the architectural board review as a way to codify those changes so folks don't have to go back through that process unnecessarily. And I reported that the code amendments are actually in the works. So this is just an informational report, more robust than what I provided, but I wanted to share that with everybody, that here's the work of the consultant, Camaros, who was hired by the village earlier this summer, and I've been working through those changes with the ABR. They're finished with the draft language as they see how they would like to handle it in terms of handling the L1 and L2 and trying to make the signage code match up with the actual occupants, tenants, and users of those properties that are out there today. And so they're going to hand that off to the Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals, who will, their by law is the body that will have the public hearing about that, and get it back to in your hands for a final recommendation soon. But that's the full, complete update.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Village attorney's report.
No report tonight.
Village president's report. No reports. Okay, I do have a report. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Which is the appointment of Cherie Dittmer to the Architectural Board of Reviews. You've received the information report, so I need a motion to appoint Mrs. Dittmer. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, so moved by Mrs. Marquis. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, acceptance of the correspondence was delivered to the Village Board of Trustees
Excuse me.
in the informational report September 6 and 13. Do I have a motion to accept the correspondence?
So moved.
Okay, so moved by Mrs. Anchorman. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Toll. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We have item number 12 on our list here, which is a resolution creating a new bank account and an authorizing certain village official signatures with First Midwest Bank. Currently, most financial institutions offer free online payment services for their customers, including the option of making payments directly without the need to mail a check. Online bill payment processes generate a check on behalf of the customer that can take 5 business days to generate. This method of payment creates extra work for the village as payment stubs are no longer provided with online banks-generated check payments, creating the need to manually enter account numbers and payment amounts. To improve the village financial processes, Finance Director O'Connell recommends implementing First Midwest Bank's payment consolidation services. This service acts as an agent for the electronic collection of bill payments issued via bank checks from online banking services. Instead of receiving paper checks, an electronic ACH file is provided daily for the village to post, eliminating posting errors, saving staff time, and improving revenue recognition. In order to facilitate the ACH deposits from the bill pay consolidation service, a checking account with First Midwest Bank is needed to transfer collected funds to the village's primary account at Lake Forest Bank and Trust. Please note that the First Midwest Bank account will not be assessed fees. A banking resolution established the new account and authorized signatures for the village is required to initiate the bill pay consolidation service. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, so moved by Ms. Anchorman and second by
Mr. Toll.
Second.
Mr. Toll. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Meyer.
All
Mr. Toll,
right. Okay, any questions or things to the finance director regarding this?
I just have a question. So the data comes already in this electronic file, but because there's no account number on the remittance, if it were done by paper, what additional information is added so that you can more easily say, oh, it's this customer X or account number 123?
So when you go online to make an online payment, it does require you to enter the receiving account number. Problem is it shows up on a payment stub that isn't the same as what we normally receive, so we'd have to validate and look that up. The file will contain the account information and will self-validate when we import.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. All righty. Let's see where I was. Okay. That's a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, we have number, already done number 13. Number 14 is an ordinance amending section 10-13-3 of the Lake Bluff zoning regulations. L1 district uses, physical fitness facilities, use of SIC codes. This is first reading approval of the ordinance. Okay, do I have do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. Anchorman. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Toll. And in its June, July regular meetings, the PCCBA discussed use regulations in the L1 district and directed staff to prepare detailed recommendations concerning permitted and special uses, the interpretation of SIC codes, table use, and administrative interpretations of unlisted uses. These changes are intended to reduce the obstacles to establishing a business within the district. At the direction of the PCCBA in July, the attached ordinance would amend 68 different uses consistent with the following principles, which are further described in the attached July memorandum to the PCCBA. Align the L1 district's permitted and special uses to those in the central business district, such that the L1 district is generally no more restrictive than the central business district. Add certain special uses to the L1 district that are special uses in the L2 district. Add certain uses permitted and special uses recommended by the Waukegan Road Corridor Study. Change certain uses from special uses to permitted uses that are similar to uses that would now be permitted due to the above changes. Allow physical fitness facilities smaller than 10,000 square feet to be permitted in the L1 district, and those smaller than 2,000 square feet to be permitted in the central business district. Alter the interpretation of SIC codes in the zoning use table to be advisory. The PCZBA has additionally discussed the implementation of use interpretations within the zoning regulations. This mechanism would allow the building commissioner to authorize uses not specifically listed in the zoning use table that are substantially similar to permitted or special uses already provided for in the code. These types of unlisted use situations represent many of the text amendments concerning use that the PCZBA considers. Additional time and review is necessary to complete these changes and integrate them with others pending changes. The PCZBA will continue to consider this policy item at future meetings. Questions from the trustees? And this is a first reading approval, which is a voice vote. Nothing? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We now have an ordinance amending ordinance 2018-27 regarding the hours of operation of the paddle tennis facility, which is at 355 West Washington Blair Park. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved, okay, by Mrs. Marquis. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Grenier. Again, this is first reading, which is a voice vote. 2018, the Park District requested an amendment to their special use permit to 1 night per week from October 1 to March 31st. Extend the hours of on-court lighting from 10:15 for an additional 15 minutes until 10:30 p.m. This extension would facilitate the scheduling of league events by the Chicago Platform Tennis Charities, which governs men's platform tennis leagues in the Chicagoland area. Ordinance 2018-27 granted this request for only the 2018-19 season. It required the Park District to conduct further outreach to neighbors and report back to the village on the outcome of the time extension by January 2019. Park District submitted said report, which was distributed to the members of the PCZBA and which is attached to the Park District's application. As described in their application, the Park District now seeks to make this change permanent on a once-per-week basis. The district proposes that they notify the village of their selection of a given weekday each year to schedule extended league play. Since the 2018 amendment, Blair Park has been rezoned into the new recreational, institutional, and open space RIO zoning district. The district regulations provide that the Park District's current special use permit remain in full force and effect. According, this relief could be granted either through the RIO development plan process or by amending the existing special use permit. Given the minor nature of this change, staff recommended it be a process as an amendment. At the September 18th meeting, the PCZBA conducted a public hearing and unanimously recommended the village board grant the requested special use permit amendment. Any questions from the trustees on this?
I had a really quick question. There was one resident who was not in favor of this and mentioned something about the process, and I don't know if he gave any more detail than that. I don't know if Glenn could speak to that, but he just said there were concerns about the process.
Sure, so you're referring to the resident that spoke at the Plan Commission meeting?
I think so. It looks like Roger at 315 West Washington, whoever that,
Okay.
Roger.
If we're speaking about the same person, the concern raised was essentially that, the Park District has come back repeatedly over the last few years to adjust the conditions applicable to this site. This exact same request came forward last year and was only granted on a one-year basis. And so I think the assertion that gentleman was making was that perhaps there is an intent to erode these conditions over time. And so I don't know if he was expressing his frustration or asking that the Plan Commission view future requests less favorably. I don't think it was any issue with the application at hand or any procedural defect.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else have anything on this? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Trustees report. Trustees have anything they wish to weigh in on tonight? Okay. We have, do we have executive session?
We do. I would like to bring something that came up late today having to do with labor negotiations.
All right, so we're gonna go into executive session to discuss labor negotiations.
Can I ask one quick question before that? I should have, on the trustees report, used that moment. I apologize for this.
No, that's all right, go ahead.
Drew, did we, this goes to the storm that occurred 2 weeks ago. Did we get anything, any new reports from residents or areas that we have not heard before? In other words, people keep asking me whenever we have these big storms, did anything else change? Something else come up? Something else occur? And I'm asking only because I had a few residents suggest that they felt that even though there was less rain, that our sewers underneath had more trouble keeping up, and some people suggested there was backing up into basements that they hadn't seen before. And has anything like that been reported?
I'm gonna have Jeff come up, but here's what I will say. What I had heard from residents was really two things. One is that particular storm, which was, I think, was a 25-year event, but or close to that. There was power outage.
Right, because the tree came down.
Right. So yeah, there was a tree that fell on Maple, and it took out 200 residents. And I think power was out from like 1:30 in the morning, and for extended periods. Some people came back on at 5:30, some later in the day, some not until like the end of the business day. But with that, if people did not have backup battery sump pumps, that's what I heard, what type of events happening. Yeah. And the other thing I would say is that every storm is different.
That's right.
And so that even if you have, like we have two 25-year storms where the flooding happens can be different. And but Jeff, in terms of what we saw, I think the one thing that was different is we did notice that West Sheridan Place did not flood, right? Some of these things, right? And Lincoln did not flood, the usual suspects.
That's right.
But Green Bay Road did. And I don't know the list. There's Scranton, East Scranton did.
Yeah, we had flood, no, so we said we had a 25-year storm, and just to make this even more complicated, there's different durations to these storms.
Yep.
This was a 6-hour, 25-year storm. Different areas of the village will flash based on a shorter, harder storm versus a longer, more drawn-out storm.
Or how much rain has fallen in the days before and all that.
Yes.
In the East Terrace with the longer, more sustained rain, that real quick hitter like we had overnight, a couple Saturdays, that kind of flashes different areas. But I do think the biggest issue from the residents I talked to was just the power going out, and then either not having a backup sump pump or the batteries actually just not keeping up with the amount. Some of their batteries died because
those last about 8 hours, I think, from my experience.
I think we had like a 6-hour outage for some people.
Longer.
Trees down on, I think it was Maple. Snapped the lines on the tree at Washington, and also like 400 feet to the south up by Center.
Yeah.
Those lines broke as well, and it took ComEd a long time to get that cleaned up.
Yeah, I had a resident report that they got water in their basement to a level that they have never had before, with all the stuff that's been going on the last 3-4 years, and are asking, did something in our infrastructure change or fail? And the answer is no.
It shouldn't. Our public works guys, they will go out any time of night and they go and they look, but a lot of times if you get a quick backup in your basement because maybe a sewer was obstructed, the pressure will push that obstruction through, and by the time anybody gets there, the obstruction's gone. There's really nothing we can see other than a flowing sewer.
Okay.
And this time of year, I mean, Jake is in the audience, and our public works superintendent, he's well aware. This is the time when leaves start falling, and let's get obstructed, right? That's when you start seeing more other localized flooding that may not occur during the summer, right? And so.
The walnuts, yes. They fit in the sewer grate just right, and they plug it up.
I also wanted, some residents to hear that, with each of these storms, when things happen, we're aware of them, and you guys seem to be on top of it.
And I hope that if that happens, that they report it to us so we can,
I'm not sure that they
keep track of it at least.
That's
for
actually
the modeling purposes, right?
That's a good public service announcement to make too. That is if something does happen, to let us know so that we can piece the puzzle together, because it seems like some areas influence others.
Yeah, and if our sewer truly backs up, it shouldn't be just one person.
Yes, of course.
It should be multiple, and that's what we look for when we get those reports.
I think there were
If 5 people in a block,
several
then I know
people
we have
around
a problem.
that had trouble over there. It was on East Scranton Avenue.
And the other thing,
300 block-ish,
Yeah, 700, 600.
700, okay.
and we've directed residents, there's a number on the village's website for people to call if there's after-hour flooding. But it's if their power's out and they don't have access, the short answer is they can call 911. I mean, that's what a lot of people do. And so we direct people to do that, especially if there's power outages and they can't find the the right number and so forth, so. Speaking of public service announcements.
Thank you, yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, do I have a motion to go into executive session to consideration of the minutes and also to discuss labor relations?
Collective bargaining under
Collective.
Section 2C2 of the Open Meetings Act.
Thank you so much.
So moved.
Second.
All right.
Roll call.
Roll call, please.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Ankerman.
Aye.
Trustee Grenier.
Aye.